everybody. Welcome back to Shop and Ball. I am Aaron Chau, accompanied by my co-host John Harris, as always. And we are back to share thoughts and analysis and reactions, all that fun stuff about or over Wildcard Weekend or Super Wildcard Weekend. Once again, as they're now dubbing it, had a lot of upsets. A couple of the favorites pulled out, but it was a really underdog heavy type weekend, as I'm sure many know. If you haven't though, we will definitely go over all the games, and of course, including ours, but that'll be later. We're gonna go in chronological order. So obviously starting with the first one, which was the Houston Texans. John, they get the big upset over the Cleveland Browns, and it was a resounding one, 45-14, especially blew open in the second half. So what were your thoughts here?
Yeah, the Texans looked great. They did their thing. I think the big differentiator here too was the turnovers for Cleveland. Joe Flacco unfortunately throws a couple picks. One got returned for a touchdown. And that was kind of the big difference maker in that first half, because in the first half, the game was relatively close, and then the interceptions happened. And then they come at a halftime, and clearly the Texans coaching staff had just kind of figured out the game, because from halftime on, it was a 21-0 game, where the Texans scored 21, Houston got shut out in that second half. So Cleveland got shut out in the second half. The Browns offense just kind of let them down, unfortunately. They weren't really able to ever truly get in a rhythm. They were moving the ball relatively effectively, but even then, compared to like the last time they played Houston, Amari Cooper did not have as much of an impact. David Njoku had a better game, and the tight ends as a whole were pretty solid, but it just truly wasn't enough to keep up with the Texans' high scoring, especially when the defense adds a touchdown there. So, yeah, just Cleveland, they kind of fell apart. It goes to show that, unfortunately, all the injuries kind of caught up with them. You'd really love to see what this team truly could have been if we were out there with this matchup having Deshaun Watson, Elijah Moore, maybe even Nick Chubb, right? So the Browns, it's got to sting if you're a Browns fan, especially considering how much hype there was kind of building for the Browns. But I think they'll be all right moving forward, because all right, we have an amazing defense with a lot of young pieces that we're building around, like JOK, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, all those kind of guys. So the defense should be good for, a few years, and then the offense, you can just kind of build upon it. You reevaluate maybe the future of Nick Chubb, because he's getting a little older. The wear and tear might start to hit him. So maybe you start addressing the running back position, adding some more depth, and you start adding some receivers, and, maybe keep building up the trenches. So, yeah, it sucks for Cleveland, but for Houston, man, what a win. I don't know the last time they won a playoff game. Was it like 2018? 2017?
I forget. I don't know.
It was whenever they had Watson. I'm pretty sure it was that year that they were up big on the Chiefs at half, and then they completely collapsed. I'm pretty sure they beat whoever they played in the wild card round that game. Maybe it was the Bills. I can't remember. Anyway, Houston gets a win. CJ Stroud era starts off strong. The guy became the first ever quarterback to, I believe, have a perfect passer rating in his playoff debut, and he's not the only one of the weekend, but he was the first, since this was the first game played. So, man, the Texans keep rolling.
Yeah, I think a big, huge thing that, and I'll mention this to another game, it was, Houston taking advantage of Cleveland's over aggressiveness, especially the Cleveland defense over aggressiveness. They love to live in man, and we kind of mentioned going into this and throughout the year that Cleveland's been a little bit simple at times, but they've been so good with their pass rush, and they're really good corners. Greg Newsome's been great for them, opposite of Denzel Ward, and it was the defense that was carrying them for a while. But you mentioned, of course, doesn't help when you get the 2 pick sixes, and then obviously just a couple. We've seen a little bit with this defense, just a handful of explosive plays, and of course CJ Stroud just. Yeah, like you mentioned, it's kind of a masterclass, obviously, with the perfect QBR, but, not turning the ball over, but yet still striking downfield. Yeah, and there could have been more, because remember that first drive, I think they still, if I remember, a field goal, they had opportunities for bigger plays. Like Dalton Schultz had a, pretty bad drop on a key down, and, so could have been worse offensively could have been better offensively for the Texans, worse for the Browns in that aspect. And yeah, like you mentioned, especially for the injury thing, especially hit them on offense, without the tackles, Nick Chubb and such. So yeah, regardless, I know it's a bit of a sour loss for Cleveland the way the season ended, but yeah, it's Cinderella story was already, it already kind of reached its apex, it seemed like. And obviously they met their fate, unfortunately, against the Texans. So we'll see. Obviously, I'm assuming Joe Flacco goes back to the couch, but good for him. Maybe, who knows? Maybe he'll actually, another team will want his backup services, or we'll see what happens with him. And yeah, like you mentioned, we'll see what the Browns do, how they, what they address in free agency. I'm not sure if they have much money in free agency, but even if they're out there draft wise. And of course, for the Texans too, I want to add kind of a win-win for them, as obviously they get the win here, but they own Cleveland's pick, so because they beat the Browns, it's a better pick too for the first round pick that they owe. That's the last bit of the Deshaun Watson trade, I believe. So a little bit ironic there too that they met that the last year that this will affect both squads. So yeah, a huge win for, like I mentioned, for that fan base, and D'Amico Ryans, of course, as well. We'll see if they can keep riding that momentum come next week. As we'll make those picks obviously later / next podcast probably. But anyway, so there was that one. Now let's move on over to the other game that was on Saturday. This one, kind of a common theme. A lot of these games were blowouts. This one was relatively not a contest as well. Not as exciting as the other one, even though many expected this one to be an exciting one, unless you looked at the weather report, as it was really cold in Kansas City. So just saw before we recorded, I'm not sure if you saw, like multiple fans and such had to go to the hospital to hypothermia and frostbite. So yeah, kudos to those Chiefs, to those fans in general that toughed out that terrible weather. But Chiefs ended up winning 26-7 over the Dolphins. Your thoughts here, John?
I mean, with the weather like it was, the Chiefs, they committed to the run game. They got things going. Isaiah Pacheco was involved pretty heavily. It wasn't the most efficient, but that's kind of what happens in super cold weather like that. And then also we kind of saw the emergence of Rashee Rice. He's been having a really good second half of the year, and we're maybe starting to see the transition of Travis Kelce being the go-to guy to maybe Rashee Rice being the go-to guy. I'm not going to say the torch is like officially passed off yet, but we could be seeing it sort of happening before our very eyes, because the guys had a really good second half of the year. Mahomes was solid, and then on the other side, the Chiefs defense they were huge. Like Tua didn't have much of an impact in this game through the air with, his receivers like Waddle and Tyreek. They combined for 90 total yards and 1 touchdown. So they weren't able to have like a huge game, which is somewhat expected in the cold weather and the wind. But also, I think the most notable part of, the Dolphins' performance was they couldn't really run the ball. The Chiefs completely took away the run. Now, albeit the Dolphins didn't truly commit to it, Achane was incredibly inefficient, 6 carries for 9 yards. But Mostert, he had 8 for 33. It felt like maybe they could have ran it a little bit more with Mostert to see what was moving there. But they decided to throw it 39 times. And just unfortunately, like when you have a quarterback like Tua, who's, not the strongest arm, kind of used to playing in the warmer weather, went to Bama, warm weather school, went to, the Dolphins, warm weather team. I just don't think he has a ton of experience in the cold. And yeah, like as most people believe, like the cold is where you really got to pound the rock, and Miami wasn't able to do it. Chiefs come out on top. Shout out to their defense, because they were pretty big time here. So the Chiefs keep rolling, and the Dolphins finished the year with the only win they had against a winning team being the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah. And once again, I don't want to be dubbed as Tua haters, but we've been saying this since the beginning, and we mentioned in the breakdown in our predictions for this game was, don't think he's going to be able to, to being an anticipation thrower like he is, that doesn't have great, arm strength, relying a lot on timing. Tough to do that in the elements. We saw that. Even the one touchdown, I don't want to, hey, he made the play. There's a touchdown, even though, Tyreek had him beat. It was a little behind him. Great catch by Tyreek and run, because, it was a little underthrown. I'm sure you remember that. That's the only highlight that the Dolphins had. Other than that, I mean, their offense didn't do much. And then it's like we mentioned, Kansas City had a feel for them from Germany, and it's just take away the screens and over the middle. And especially with the weather, like they were able to kind of just call Miami's bluff. And once again, Miami got them the one time, even though it was a little bit iffy, but they got them the one time. Other than that, Kansas City had them on locks. And like you mentioned, didn't get the run game going. And yeah, I think this isn't on Tua, and more just Miami too as a whole. Kansas City just more built for this. I mean, we mentioned their front four, especially Chris Jones is amazing, and Karlaftis has been very solid. You know, he's stealing his sacks. I'm not sure you saw their little post game interview with that. So, and then they're young corners. I mean, we were seeing Trey McDuffie's praises a bit last season. He was a guy we're both high on, and he's been really good for them. Maybe not absolute lockdown, but been put in some tough spots and has survived for the most part, except for that, that one touchdown. And then even L'Jarius Sneed, a very underrated guy that no one talks about. He's been really good for them. And once again, kind of like in the same boat with McDuffie in regards to asked to do a lot, be in zone at times. Sometimes, hey, we're going to leave you on the island because we're going to do, Spagnuolo creative blitzes. So, kudos. I think kudos to the Chiefs leaning into this, run the ball, and then, hey, run the ball, play good defense, and, hey, Mahomes may make a play or two on his own. Like, I know he had a few good scrambles, obviously, of course. And, of course, we know that there's even more to be had, too, because Kelsey had a couple of bad drops early on and such. So, good to see the Chiefs kind of leaning into the weather and, and leaning into the identity of just being a physical team, while Dolphins, like, it's just confirmed most of our concerns for the season. And we'll see, how they address this going forward. Obviously, I would assume offensive line may be something they address. Who knows what happens with the quarterback position, because then they do have to commit to Tua, I think, after next year. So contract extension.
I think they've already said they want to extend him.
Yeah. Question is, though, what's the price point? You know what I mean? Because I think we've talked about it off pod. Like, do you pay? I'm not sure if I'm paying him Daniel Jones money, because even then, Daniel Jones money we saw was an overpay. So, and so granted, he's had, a little bit of that injury history, so I'm not sure does Miami factor that in and such. So we'll see what happens going forward. But Chiefs win. They move on. We'll get to see Mahomes on the road for the first time, as we'll mention one of the other games later. But they win. Chiefs win, get the big win there to advance to the divisional round. So supposed to be the Bills game next, but they moved that to Monday due to the weather concerns, because their stadium was literally snowed in. And they had it was terrible weather, I'm sure, as everyone's seen the clips there. So that game got moved to Monday, so we'll talk about that one, like, again, in the order that they went. So unfortunately, John, now we go to the next game, which was my Green Bay Packers. They beat up on your Dallas Cowboys on Sunday, 48-32. It was, everyone's probably seen the memes. Everyone's been piling on Dallas because that's what the media does nowadays. That's what everyone does. So I'm not going to dive much into that, John. You mentioned this may be very short and sweet. I've heard, so go ahead, man. The floor is yours. Your thoughts on this disappointing end to your Cowboys season.
This one probably stings the least out of any of the playoff losses, just because I think that in the back of my head, I kind of always knew that even if Dallas was to make a run, San Francisco was going to end it. I mean, let's just be honest. Like, they beat Dallas 3 times in a row, including this year, the last 2 years in the playoffs. Like, in a hypothetical world where Dallas does make it to the conference championship, I truly believe that San Francisco is going to beat us. Like, the only way that I think Dallas, in its current iteration, would beat that Niners team is they would have to play perfect football, and the Niners would have to make a lot of mistakes, which is just asking a lot because the Niners have a huge coaching advantage. So that's why it doesn't sting, all right? It still sucks to lose. Everybody's making fun of them, but they kind of deserve it. Like, they proved everybody right. The whole meme of the coach yelling that they are who we thought they were, that guy. Yeah, like, that's kind of what the Cowboys became, because on paper, you just faced a team that they were 9-8, right?
Yep.
Like that was the record coming in. And like the Packers, like the 9-8 is a little deceptive because they kind of hit their stride at the end of the year, right? So they weren't really as bad as like the record would make you think they are. But on paper, like let's be honest, the Cowboys had a lot of advantages, and they weren't able to take advantage of those throughout the game. Green Bay looked far more prepared. The moment that the game started and Green Bay won the coin toss and wanted the ball, I kind of just had this gut feeling like, LaFleur knows what he's doing. Like he's confident. They came in, they ran the ball down our throats, they scored the touchdown, and then boom, first drive for the Cowboys. What do we run? We run some like basic slants, and Dak throws the pick to Jair. And then they score again, and it just, it snowballed, right? It snowballed. I kind of figured that the game would go like this once that pick was thrown, that like Dallas looks nervous. Green Bay is clearly confident. As you were talking about, they're playing with house money. They have a mindset of like, everybody thinks that we're going to get beat. So like, who cares? Let's just go out and play balls to the wall and do what we know we can do well. And they did it. Aaron Jones had a great game. They couldn't cover Romeo Doubs on third down. For some reason, I'm very disappointed in Dan Quinn. I think the most out of this game, just because I have really high expectations for him because of how highly I think of him as a defensive coordinator. But for some reason, they were playing zone to start this game, and I don't know if like this was some strategy thing. Like I don't know Jordan Love's numbers against zone coverage or anything like that. So I don't know if there was like a reason behind why they did that. I assume there has to be, because Dallas is such a heavy man coverage team that that didn't make sense at all to me. The Cowboys still couldn't really run the ball that effectively. I mean, sure, you can look at the stats, but like, oh, Tony Pollard had a touchdown and 56 yards. Yeah, but he averaged less than 4 yards a carry. And also the score was not as close as 48-32. Like Dallas did their damage in garbage time. I'm just going to be real. Like I hate the narrative that Dak like stat stuffs in garbage time, because I don't think it's really true in the regular season, but in this game, it kind of was. Like, I get it. Like, you're not going to just give up. You're going to keep fighting, but like all their damage came when it was kind of out of hand. So yeah, I mean, Dallas, they got outplayed on almost every single level. Dak did not look great. He looked nervous to start the game through the 2 picks. He didn't really get in a rhythm until it was too late. They couldn't run the ball at all. CeeDee Lamb had multiple drops in the first quarter. On the defensive side, like I said, they were playing zone. Stephon Gilmore kind of got cooked by Romeo Doubs a couple times. Jaron Kearse, he was really good a couple years ago, but has just not been that great this year, to be honest. Dallas was running 6 defensive backs pretty much the entire game, and the Packers exploited that and were able to run all over them. The defensive line, when they did get pressure onto Jordan Love, it didn't really matter because he was making those like lofted throws deep downfield to somebody who was wide open because the coverage was breaking down. So, I mean, it was an embarrassing loss from the Cowboys. I think that major changes need to be made. But I honestly, knowing how the Cowboys have kind of operated in recent years, I'm like 60 to 70% sure that Mike McCarthy is going to be the head coach next year. Just looking at Jerry's track record, he was very aggressive and like a risk taker when he first took over the Cowboys. I mean, to this day, my grandma will not watch the Cowboys because Jerry fired Tom Landry, which is like a very bold move, right? Like that's kind of crazy, considering how legendary he was for the Cowboys. And at the time was like probably viewed as a top 3 coach ever at the time. Obviously, since then, we've had a lot of great coaches, but that was like 1987 or whenever it was. So, and he had multiple Super Bowls, which is like pretty rare for a coach. Anyway, I digress. So Jerry was a big risk taker. Even like 10 years ago, like them trading up for Morris Claiborne, the trade for Roy Williams, they had a lot of very aggressive moves, but in recent years, they haven't really done that. Like they trade like 5th round picks for Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore. Great moves, but not like super aggressive in terms of value. They hire Mike McCarthy, which felt like a safe pick because he won a Super Bowl and he made the playoffs a lot. So like at least we know he has a resume. as opposed to hiring like some sort of young, unknown offensive mind who could maybe be changing the face of the league. Like, I don't know, guys like Mike McDaniels with Miami, or, all the guys from the Shanahan tree, which they were already hired by that point. But, I digress. Those kind of guys. Or even someone like, why am I blanking on his name now? The Lions head coach.
Dan
Something.
Dan Campbell.
Dan Campbell. Yeah, I couldn't think of anything but Dan Quinn.
Gosh. Yeah.
I was just so locked in on Dan Quinn that I was like, Dan something.
It was
Dan
a white
Campbell.
guy with a Dan name, and I was like, I couldn't. Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah. But I remember like he was actually linked to the Cowboys around that time because he was kind of a popular head coaching candidate coming from the Saints. He had played for the Cowboys previously. I don't know if he had ever coached in the Cowboys, but I know he had played for them during his career. And so obviously, those kind of connections, you get linked to it. I don't even think they ever interviewed him. And look what he's doing with the Lions. So like they just kind of took the safe option. And the most damning evidence to me as to why they're going to probably keep McCarthy is that we were in the same situation with Jason Garrett like 5 years ago, where Garrett had which Garrett's I think was a lot worse because at least for McCarthy, like they've made the playoffs 3 straight years. Garrett didn't have that level of consistency, and I think they only won like 2 or 3 playoff games over the course of 10 years that Garrett was the coach. Under McCarthy, they've already won 2, I think. Maybe no, just 1. I think they've only won 1, but still, like they're on pace for better than what Garrett was doing. Regardless, Garrett had 1 year left on his contract. The writing was on the wall. Jerry Jones doesn't like to pay buyouts, so what did he do? He just let Garrett coach that final year. Basically, it was a throwaway of a year. We go to the playoffs, we lose in the first round. Like, it is what it is. That's probably what's going to happen with the Cowboys this next year. I'm truly hoping they fire McCarthy to go scorched earth. Even if like Dan Quinn has to leave, I'll be honest, I'm not too pressed about it. Last year, I was like so convinced that I think Dan Quinn could maybe be a good head coach, but still a little bit apprehensive. I'm not a big fan at this point. Like, I still think he's a great defensive coordinator, but there's just times where he gets outclassed. And if as a head coach, I don't know. I just don't think that he would necessarily be able to adjust in those kind of moments, which has kind of been his biggest critique over his career. And that happened in the 28-3, Super Bowl. So yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping that they just clean house. Or if they want, they can keep Dan Quinn as coordinator. But I'd rather just get a new head coach. But like I said, I think McCarthy's probably going to stay. So, yeah. So it is what it is. I know I said it was going to be short, but I figured let me at least just give some analysis here because I'm not, like I said, it doesn't sting. I'm not super emotional about this one. I'm kind of numb to it at this point because it's just been happening my whole life. So at least let me give like the analysis of what actually happened to the game, which is, like I said, they got outclassed, they got outcoached, they got outplayed. So we'll see what happens. But like I said, I'm a bit pessimistic on the fact that Dallas probably just runs it back because, they won 12 games 3 years in a row. And, Dak had a great year, so we need continuity and all that stuff. And then realistically, it'll probably just happen again next year. So,
yeah. And hey, maybe Podcast will initiate before I upload this episode, and tomorrow morning.
I hope so.
We're recording this on Wednesday, 17th, so maybe as of tomorrow morning, because it happened a week ago. I was like, I don't think they're going to get Mike Vrabel, and they got rid of Mike Vrabel. So who knows? We'll see what happens there. In regard,
I had my rants about Belichick, and then they got rid of him like the next day. So
yes, we'll see. In regards to the game itself, yeah, you mentioned Dan Quinn, being a little simplistic, even in his zones. It's not mixing up the safeties, things like that. Okay, is one safety back? Okay, like Jordan Love's like, okay, it's probably probably cover 3, some sort of aspect of that, match 3, and it just led to makes it easy on these young quarterbacks. It's kind of the same thing with the Browns. Where the Browns, they were crazy. It was like, okay, I know I got man to man across the board, and it happened a lot. I feel like especially in those third downs where it was some sort of crazy blitz. So it may have been zone, but it's really just man to man across the board. There's the you mentioned, of course, Dobbs beating out a couple of times because credit to the Packers, too, knowing probably that, the situations or being able to see that, okay, it's blitz coming. Jordan Love multiple times, calling the tight end. All right, block it up, give me an extra second or two so Love can, sit on that back foot and we saw multiple times delivered big time throws. And then
And I want to say too, for Dobbs, there was often crucial third downs. Like it was like a 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10. Like Dobbs was making important plays too.
yes, and then I mean, we didn't even like Jane Reed wasn't even, or and Christian Cross. Neither of them were even a factor, and they're the ones that I was like, man, these guys are the X factors because they're probably the best at beating man-to-man coverage or just one-on-one type coverages, and it just showed that LaFleur had a really good understanding for how to attack Dan Quinn and the Seattle scheme, and I think it's important to note too, like because of the being with Shanahan part of that tree. Spent a lot of time with Dan Quinn. It's one of those things that I didn't really factor in going into this game that I thought about as the game was going on and afterwards. Like, oh yeah, like they have history, so I'm sure LaFleur knew some of the rules of their concept, especially in zone or man, and just handing guys off because it looked like on the one Dobbs one, where he really shook Gilmore. It looked like he was going to do a crossing route, and then he just put on the brakes and went back towards the sideline. And I know you know that one. Like that one was just, I think it was just. Green Bay knowing like usually Green Bay act like they're going to run crossers, so maybe that Gilmore thought that they're going to pass it off, but nope. Like I said, Dobbs just had a great read and react, and that was just great game planning, like you mentioned, just kind of out coaching, knowing Dallas's tendencies, and so tough. Tough loss for Dallas, obviously, and I mean you already kind of had all the points for their offense, both interceptions. I mean, bad interceptions by Dak, but I think it also falls upon very simplistic scheme. I mean, the second interception, it was just all, and what I really can't put it on Dak because they're sitting on the slants. Like both the picks were Green Bay sitting on the slants. Like first one, Jair made a great play. Like he didn't even, it was like Chris Sims broke it down in his podcast today, like that first interception where like Cooks was running like an out and then like in kind of slant route, but Jair never bit on the out route. Like he did not care because he knows Dallas loves to run slants. It's Mike McCarthy, and he sat. Then obviously the second one, and he ironically had Dak had CD open in the corner route in that one, but so that's a little bit, that was on Dak. And then, of course, the other one, it was just really a great read by Darnell Savage again, because Dallas is pressing. They just threw a pick six. I feel like they knew, okay, they're probably going to try to go to CD in this crucial moment. They did. And Savage really went off his guy that he was supposed to go to be covering to jump that route and pick six, and that was pretty much all she wrote there. And then I would hope that change is happening just all around, like you're mentioning. I think we mentioned, this team is talented. A good offensive line. We know Tony Pollard's still good. Maybe you get another running back, but so we know if you look hard enough, you can get one in third, fourth round probably to complement him. We know CD's awesome and great, and I know there's a lot of criticism for Dak, and he didn't have a great game here, but like we said before, like grass ain't always green. Like who are you gonna move off him for? He's still a really good quarterback, and I think they gotta get new offensive ideas in, because the Mike McCarthy West Coast, we're seeing like these little short, like Peyton Manning death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's not working anymore right now in the NFL. It's really hard to do that. Like the Dolphins kind of were a little bit like that, except they were a pass first kind of team, and we're seeing a little bit with the Cowboys. Maybe that new ideas need to occur on both sides of the ball too, because I mentioned the defense very aggressive, kind of simplistic. We're gonna do what we do. We're gonna be aggressive about it. Yeah, maybe you need to get some new ideas and concepts in on both sides of the ball, but we'll see, because Dan Quinn is, as of right now, was also in talks for Seattle. I think Seattle was looking at him because he was a coordinator there and such. Which
I think he'll take a head coaching job if he gets an offer. Yeah. To be honest,
it seems, I don't know. I have no inside track. I just feel like Seattle would probably be one, just because of the familiarity. In terms of his work with them, and scheme wise too. Those players fit what he'll want to do. So we'll see. What happens there. And obviously with your Cowboys going forward. I'm sure you're opening your phone every morning, wondering if you see the notification about, Mike McCarthy being gone, or any sort of clarification. Yeah. But we'll see if anything happens. I mean, if Pete Carroll is going to be potentially pushed out the door, which we don't have time to talk about, but I mean that's felt like what happened there. Oddly, we'll see what happens with Dallas.
The only thing that I think would make it to where Mike McCarthy goes in Jerry Jones' mind is it's a really tough sell to the fan base to keep him after the performances. Like, you brought, in the minds of the fans, he was brought in to elevate a team that we already felt was capable of making a run to actually make the run, because with Jason Garrett they couldn't do it. McCarthy has not been able to get them to do it. It's been the exact same thing. The only difference is, once again, 3 straight 12-win seasons. But as I broke down before that, even during Garrett's tenure, that wasn't fully on Garrett, because like there was the year that Tony Romo got hurt. Like there was all these random injury years that it's like, yeah, okay, like, you know, that's why they didn't do that great. And if Romo doesn't get hurt that one year, then they would have done 3 straight 12-win seasons. So you wouldn't even have this random BS excuse that they're using. So that's the only reason I think they might fire McCarthy is, like I said, if the day the announcement comes out they're keeping him, I think there'd be like a massive uproar. And Jerry cares about that kind of stuff more than probably any other owner. Like he likes, you know, praise and attention. But like I said, I don't know, based on their history and what they did with Garrett, it makes me think that they're not going to take the risk, because it's easier to just keep the same guy, you know? And then when his contract runs out, then you just don't, like, you don't have to fire him. You just don't re-sign him, you know?
Well, we will see what happens going forward for the Cowboys and obviously Packers. We have we get San Francisco, so that'll be fun.
Yeah.
As Kyle Shanahan was already pulling up our tape midway through the second quarter, so he's got the jump on us.
I don't blame him.
Yeah, it was pretty much over, like you said, at that point. So he's got the jump on us. We'll see. That'll be an interesting clash, especially a familiarity there again, and you know, obviously 2 familiar teams, and we'll see if we can exercise our San Francisco, which we'll do picks then, but we'll see if we can. My Packers can exercise those demons, even though we'll see. But anyway, let's go to a team that finally did in one of the only close games of Wildcard Weekend, as the Detroit Lions. They get their big playoff win, first one since 1991, first one in Ford Field over the LA Rams, 24-23. Yeah, I'm sure many have seen the post game clip. Jared Goff, you're good enough for Detroit. And I feel like that was kind of the thing here. Detroit good enough to get the win today and just survive in advance. Like I said, 24-23 over the Rams. So what were your thoughts here in regard to this one, John?
I was a bit surprised. I thought that the Rams would have a better grasp on this game. But the Lions, they were feisty out there. And although the Rams did move the ball in the way that I kind of expected, which was Matthew Stafford in this passing game was going to kind of dominate, the Lions were able to keep up, which I thought was, I don't know, I just didn't expect it out of them. Like I did think that they could have some success through the air with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they did that. But other than that, it doesn't feel like anything really stood out. It was just like a really strong collective effort from the whole team. So, I mean, good on like the Lions, the stats, like you don't really look at anything and you see any major advantage for either team. Neither team turned the ball over. Both teams were 3 of 9 on third downs. Both teams converted their only 4th down attempt. Both teams had about 35 total penalty yards. The Rams only allowed 2 sacks. The Lions only allowed 3. So like they were kind of identical in the stats. And it's like, wow, no wonder that this game was so close. And like I said, I think that that's just the most surprising part to me, is that the Rams were kind of able to go score for score, point for point with the Rams. The Lions were able to go point for point with the Rams and make this a really exciting game. And then in the end, they held strong when they needed to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing too is just red zone defense not making life tough on the Rams. Lions defense making life tough on the Rams offense to punch in 7 points and settle. They had to settle for 3 a lot. A couple of key third downs. They did a good job of maybe taking away Puka Nacua, except for the third and one where Puka had that that long touchdown. But it was they were aggressive in there, like we mentioned, and threw some different curveballs, things that they hadn't done before. A couple different blitzes at Matthew Stafford. And we saw he got banged up too in this game as well, but he still played amazing. But just we saw a little bit of the of what the Lions have been preaching and building. Like they were still able to run the ball, especially early on, and then from there put the Rams in a bind of, okay, like, do you want to stop the run and put extra guys in the box, or Jared Goff's good enough where we can get guys open downfield and kind of gash you that way. So, especially in the first half. So, yeah, kudos to the Lions. Brian Johnson there, who is probably going to be a head coaching candidate. He was last year, but he turned it down. So we'll see if he'll do it again. I feel like it'll be hard to do so a second time. And yeah, Rams. I mean, in regards to them, I know it was a tough loss. Not trying to make mistakes for them. They did lose, but they did overexceed expectations, and it'll be very interesting to see what they do. Because their offensive line, got better throughout the year. They became a little bit less. Matthew Stafford getting killed, except for kind of this game. We know Kyrie Williams is really good, and he unfortunately left this game, as well. I think he hurt his hand, so that put them behind the eight ball a little bit more. And obviously their defense too. I think we saw a little bit of this game, like in key moments, couldn't really rely on just playing man to man, which you're gonna have to do at some points if you want to be a successful team. And you saw, that basically to seal the game, big pass, Amon-Ra, and such. So be interesting to see what the Rams do going forward, but continuing the success that they've had in previous years with Sean McVay, and we'll see. And now I believe they should have like their first round picks and such back. I'm not 100% sure, but if I remember correctly, they should have it back. So although they lose, they'll actually be able to have more draft capital to add some more talent and help out that team, and possibly see a fully healthy Cooper Kupp, because it never felt like he was 100% him, and maybe he's on the down. He's starting to go on the downside of his career, but he never really felt like the same guy as he was even last year, the year before, this year. So maybe a full off season will help him out there in regards to that. But yeah, big win for the Lions and Detroit, of course, as they advance on to the next round. We'll go over who they meet in a moment. First, we got to go once again in order. Now we go to Buffalo, where the Bills, they took care of business a couple days later than they were supposed to, because once again this game got postponed to Monday. But they handled their business against the Steelers, 31-17, so a little bit closer than many anticipated, but nonetheless, Bills got the job done. What were your thoughts here, John?
I mean, listen, this Buffalo team, I remember when they were sitting at 6-6 and everybody was panicking, criticizing Josh Allen for all the turnovers and all that stuff, and talking about how this was the downfall of Buffalo. And then they start to incorporate James Cook. I want to shout out the coaching staff, because sometimes you fire a guy and he kind of becomes the scapegoat, and this is no offense to, their former offensive coordinator, but Joe Barry's done a great job with that offense. They've looked really good, and I think it's possibly been a key reason as to why they've kind of figured things out. But also, I mean, you got to shout out McDermott and that defense, because I remember when there was a point early in the season post the Milano injury, the Tre'Davious White injury, where we were talking about this team, like, if you have a running back in fantasy going against the Bills, you start them no matter what, because this team is like the worst run defense in the NFL. They've kind of figured it out. The offense kind of figured out their identity, and boom, Buffalo is running, they're just running over everybody. And so shout out to that Bills coaching staff, because they really, they had the talent, but they figured out how do we kind of pull this together and make sure that this team doesn't completely collapse by changing some of the ways they go about things. And it's worked fantastically. And you got to give a big shout out to a lot of the other players too, who have kind of stepped up to fill the void of some of the key guys who have been injured, or even guys like James Cook really elevating into the guy that I thought he could have been when he came out of the draft. So you love to see it for the Bills. And we've been talking about it, saying that this team feels like a team that nobody wants to play for, when you get into the playoffs, kind of expecting them to be a wild card team. They end up winning the division because Miami has another late season crumble like they did last year. And they've proven to live up to that mantra here, taking out the Steelers. I know it's the Steelers, and a lot of people view them as like, oh, it's Pittsburgh, like they make the playoffs, but they're kind of the first team eliminated. But you can never rule out Pittsburgh. They're a feisty team, and Buffalo made sure that they didn't make it ugly and keep it close. They handled their business, and they're moving on to the next round with home field advantage.
Yeah, and I want to give kudos to the Bills before I go on this little rant, because obviously they took care of business. They handled their job. Josh Allen was amazing. Still great.
Yeah.
I mean, once again,
that run was crazy.
And once again, by the way, he does do that stutter step law. He was not, I don't think at all he was trying to fake slide, like, at all. Some people are trying to say he was trying to fake slide, like he wasn't. And once again, like, he was not trying to fake slide. It did not look like that. It look like
I'm just gonna say this: if you're a defender expecting Josh Allen to slide,
he does not do that.
You have the wrong mindset.
He does not do that. He's always likes to put his head down or try to juke you. It's one of the two.
Don't try to destroy him, because if he does happen to slide, then you're probably gonna get a penalty. But be prepared to make a tackle, because Josh Allen. You remember, we've seen this guy jump over people, flip over people, bulldoze guys, stiff arm. Josh Allen is he's like a running back. If you're expecting him to slide, that's on you. I have no doubt in my mind Josh Allen has never, ever thought about fake sliding, ever.
Yeah. And I know there was the one penalty that, was a late hit, but it was a late hit. Honest. Anyway. But I know Steelers lost. It was tough. They had some turnovers, but I'm seeing I don't know why. Maybe I'm just on a certain the algorithm of social media is feeding me this, purposely trying to get me upset. Just I'm seeing some Tomlin slander now, and it's okay, first off,
it's ridiculous.
Steelers once again. I think the beauty of this is they overexceeded expectations, and the only reason we even had put the caveat at the beginning of the year, maybe they make the playoffs, is why, because it's Mike Tomlin. They just may figure out a way to get to 9-8, and they did. Despite the fact of having a revolving door at quarterback, and not in a good way like the Browns, where, okay, we found Joe Flacco, we got studs around. There's moments and times where, George Pickens was upset, Deontay Johnson was upset because they weren't getting targets, and then, now they're trying out Mason Rudolph, and kind of saw, the limitations of Mason Rudolph this game, even though he had some moments, and, defense, they've been without Cam Hayward for half the season, and they don't have really much, especially at linebacker, especially inside linebacker and defensive back. Mika Fitzpatrick was in and out this year too. We know TJ Watt's great, but unfortunately he was out this game, and every now and then he misses a couple games throughout the year. Just the way he plays is physical, and yet they still find ways to get to the playoffs. And I'm not trying to sit here and say, okay, just make the playoffs, you're good. Obviously they want to win the Super Bowl, but hey, this is a team that's kind of been still trying to find their way post Big Ben, era. They're still they lost Antonio Brown. We know that all went down. Le'Veon, they lost a bunch of studs. And it's not easy to just replace them overnight. Yet here they are. They still have a good culture, which goes to show why they're making the playoffs. They have good structure. They just they need to maybe probably get a quarterback, or and maybe a couple more defensive studs, as they're kind of relying more and more on the TJ Watts, Cam Haywards, and such. And they're a couple. They're a couple pieces away from being a true contender. It's just they lack that pizzazz. So I don't want to hear any Tomlin slander. Basically, is the end of the point, because there are 20 other teams that would love to have. Like we said, you said many times, if Tomlin hits the open market, there are going to be many teams that are going to fire their head coach. Just if they have the shot at him, and many other teams that will pause their other candidates to interview Mike Tomlin and bring him in. So I'm not hearing any of that, and especially from Steelers fans. And honestly, though, like we mentioned before, if Steelers fans really want him gone, I'm sure it feels like he's got one more year left in his contract. And if he does leave, like I said, I won't be shocked if he continues success onward else, and who knows who takes over in Pittsburgh. But like we always say, grass ain't always greener. May not be as good of a replacement. But anyways, that was my Steelers rant, despite the fact that they did lose this game, of course. But once again, I think this is one of the ones that even in our breakdown we were like, should be the Bills, might be close. There's no reason I picked Pittsburgh against the spread. Was hey, maybe Steelers keep it close, and I mean technically they almost did if they wanted. They felt like tackling Khalil Shakir at the end, but they didn't. So whatever. Anyhow, though, Bills advance. We get the Bills Chiefs. Rivalry game, I guess we can call it that now. This time in Buffalo next week, so that will be fun. As both teams have been kind of on a similar path this season, where they aren't the same offensive juggernauts as they were in years past, but both are just kind of winning ugly. So it'll be interesting to see who. We'll go over that one obviously in our picks, but let's go last but not least to the last game of Super Wildcard Weekend. It was another blowout, although even I didn't foresee it being a blowout this bad, as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers dominate the Philadelphia Eagles 32-9. Eagles fans in shambles. Jason Kelsey basically already hinting and very heavily at the fact that he is done, right? Or I mean, I know he hasn't technically officially announced it. I don't know. Basically, he's probably going to retire. Nonetheless, Eagles fans are in shambles, John. I'm sure you're very happy to see this. At least share your pain. See all those memes of Jalen also being in Cancun with Dak. So your thoughts here?
I mean, we all saw this coming, right? Like unlike the Cowboys game where that was viewed as like an upset, the Cowboys were supposed to win. I don't think anybody really truly expected the Eagles to win. Like the Buccaneers, they were able to pass all over them. They did their thing. Baker Mayfield looked great. Rashad White was able to run all over them. And then also the Eagles offense was once again simplistic. The run game was completely ineffective. And they they just weren't very good. So I don't really have much else to say. Like this is just kind of what's been the Eagles status quo for the last 2 months, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned too in the breakdown, like Tampa Bay, they're one of the few teams that can actually match up with Philly and have can handle their size, especially their great offensive line. Because Tampa Bay, we know that we saw that tush push got stuffed, and they weren't really able to get anything going in the run game, especially the simplistic run game, because we have Vita Vea and Kalijah Cansey in the middle, and those are pretty two tough guys to run on. And then especially with no AJ Brown, so now it's really just relying upon Devonta Smith. And he made a couple plays we saw, but it's just not enough to, especially against a good defense like Tampa Bay. And we saw a little bit too. I think Jalen Hurts being a little too aggressive at times. I remember there's that one viral clip of Dallas Goedert really giving it to him after I think it was that fourth down because Goddard was open like down the middle. But as you've noted before, Jalen Hurts not really looking towards the middle of the field, and also. Big stat, 0 for 9 for Philadelphia on third down. Tampa Bay sent a lot of blitzes, and a lot of guys got free. So I'm not really sure who exactly to blame, but I think the offense, equal blame goes to all these people. But like Jalen Hurts, don't see him do. I mentioned this last year after the Super Bowl. Like doesn't do a lot of checks, and once again, I'm not sure if that's a Sirianni thing. Maybe it's a coaching thing. But Philadelphia has to be better about this, especially if they want to win in the playoffs and things like that. Like, teams are going to get creative. They're going to, so it's got to have different checks for protections, who's and maybe some dummy snap counts, things like that. We mentioned before, they don't really do anything. They're very simple on offense already, so that doesn't help. They're already not trying to adjust what the defense is doing on the fly. And yeah, like you mentioned, their defense, Philadelphia's defense, just been getting on the decline. More and more exposed. They've still been relatively simplistic, and even this game too, we saw a little bit of it where they just didn't have even the same fire or effort. It felt like at times. There was a couple of the David Moore touchdown, or is it David Moore or Trey Palmer? I'm sorry, one of those two touchdowns, but probably both really. Just you saw multiple times, just a little bit lack of effort. Guys, kind of already give up the play. Some broken tackles, some bad angles, just all that sort. So we'll see if change is coming in Philly, for Nick Sirianni in the game. Once again, I don't know. I don't think they get rid of him, but I would expect it's kind of a situation where, okay, you need to bring in some new coordinator, a new defensive coordinator, and there's going to be a revamping here because this team is still really good. Like we've said the past years, like, the Eagles have almost were the winners of the draft, and you made the Super Bowl last year. You kind of excuse that. But this year, to get knocked out in the first round after, especially the way the season ended, change has to come to fully maximize that roster. Because, it's still a good roster, core of the roster. But they're just obviously lacking ideas and such. So we'll see if they can come up with those in the offseason or whatever changes they may make. But, good big win for Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as they advance going forward. They will play the Detroit Lions in Detroit next week, and so that shapes that. And we'll make our divisional picks later. But anything else you wanted to throw in before we Eagles Bucks wise or in general?
That's gonna be it for me.
All right. Well, that'll do it for John and myself. Once again, as always, feel to rate, review, subscribe, and we'll be back later in the week to make our picks against the spread for the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. And then, until then,